Good afternoon. Good Sunday afternoon, I should say. Beautiful day here in the workshop in Devon. I'll see if I can twist you around on the angle poise lamp, which doubles as my studio camera tripod. It's a bit skew with, but that's my view out through the door where I get to do reloved guitars and make them a bit better than they were before. So, a bit windy today. I've got a guitar hanging over there which I've just sprayed. It's a bit of an interesting mess of an experiment, but I won't talk too much about that. It's a very grotty old Encore. In fact, it's the body that goes with this neck, but I had a little experiment putting some gaffer tape on it, and I thought I'd see what gaffer tape was like as a finish, and then I went and sprayed a load of lacquer on top of it, so it looks like it's been bandaged up, the mummy's curse or something like that. So who knows. Anyway, we'll forget that. It might just be a few quid wasted there, but I don't mind, because it was a mess of a guitar in the first place. So what we're here for today in this video, this is going to be I guess there's two things going on really, but we are really talking about the guitar known as Reloved006, which is in fact this Encore stratocaster, which I got from the house clearance dealer on eBay. And I think, as I said in the last video, probably learned quite quickly my lesson not to do that again. It was in pretty miserable condition, and to be fair, I haven't done it too many favours since I've had it. Not only have I made a bit of a monster out of the body, I've also split the headstock in drilling out the holes to attach these quality tuners. So I've got quality Wilkinson EZ tuners on here, but the price I paid was splitting the headstock. Well, fair dues, I've clamped it and glued it back, and it's now intact and ready to go. So it will play again, and with these nice tuners, these beautiful Wilkinson, £20 a set, these tuners, and the reason they're so good, you won't be able to see it at this rate, this close up, but the reason they're so good is because they're not only well built tuners, nice little oval buttons, but they've also got, each post has two holes, so it allows you to put the string through, double it back around, pull it through again and lock it, and then you can cut off most of the excess and just give it a couple of turns and it's tuned up. So these are fast becoming my reloved tuners of choice. It may be that from here on inwards I pretty much get a set of these for every guitar that passes through here. There's no reason why not to, because they seem to be pretty damn good, and they beat all of the other stuff into submission. Somebody on a podcast I think I was listening to the other day said that the reality about cheap guitars is that the place that the companies, I think it was the GAK podcast, Guitar and Keyboard Shop podcast, but the reality of cheap guitars is that they save money in the places that they can get away with it. And so how a guitar looks and feels is going to put off the consumer if it's a bit of a tatty, rough finish, or if it looks really naff and unprofessional. So they can't really skimp too much on that. People are very critical of the finish. And I guess where the money is saved is in things like the pickups and the tuners, and perhaps the nut as well, and then after that the bridge. But certainly in the tuners, because and the pickups, because these things, they kind of at first glance they look like they doing their job, and they don't. For many newcomers or people buying guitar for the first time, they really don't know the difference between that tuner and some of these horrible tuners that I've got now. Seem to be accumulating bagful after bagful. Where have they all gone? I've got loads of these things. Typical, I can only find one bag at a time, but here's some loose ones. Yeah, so there's the sort of default Encore tuning head, and it's a horribly cheap looking thing that rattles all over the place, and inside, if you take this apart, which you can quite easily, inside that's all there is to it. It's very, very straightforward, but all very unsophisticated, and this screw in here could be over tight or under tight, or the pair of crimping arms that keep it in place can be loose. And then all of that's housed in this nasty little pressed out chunk of I don't know what it is, alloy of some kind, and that's your whole lot, and you can recognise it by the little sort of square punched out finish to it, and you'll find those on bullet strats, Squire bullet strats, and also on Encore guitars, and a few other really cheap Chinese things. They're the bog standard ones. So to a newcomer, they look, how do you know really the difference between that and that? They're just shiny things that are on the end of the guitar, but we know they make a hell of a difference. So that's where we add some quality value, and of course it comes at a price, as I say, 20 quid for the set. The other place, of course, then is the pickups, and the pickups that, let's get this out, the pickups that come with something like an Encore, like that set over there. Again, how do you tell the difference between those, which actually these are a Squire set, but how do you tell the difference between a Squire set and a set worth or costing 100 quid or more? As a newcomer, they just look like white things with magnets in them, so you wouldn't really know, and that's where they save the money, and that's why budget guitars are considered to have a really crappy sound. So, two things today. One is the Encore Strat, which is Reloved006, and I think the last video I observed that we had a slight edge to this where the fingerboard joins the neck, which tells me that this fingerboard has split off. The glue's come away and it's popped off at some time in the past. Whoever had it has glued it back adequately, and what I did is I filed down the little lip, because actually when you're playing that can be really uncomfortable. So I filed it down, and then I put a bit of lacquer on, and I brought it back up to polish with a fantastic set of sanding pads, which I totally have been converted to. These things are called I forgot what they're called now, micromesh, and you get them in a set. I think you have various choices, but this set here is about 10 of them, and there's a variety of things. Very sandy because I was using them on wood. There's a variety of grit finishes starts at 1500, so it's really, really fine anyway, and goes up to, the final one is 12,000. And what's really interesting about this is by the time you get to about between 3006 and 4000, the next one, you actually start to put a shine back on lacquer. So by the time you get to 12,000, you've literally polished the lacquer back to a shine, which I find is quite amazing, because I've been struggling to do that with other papers, with liquid polishing compounds and so on. And so these wonderful papers, which I think are only about £8 a set, ended up with me getting an incredible shine. You won't be able to see it, I don't think, but a real shine back on this lacquered edge, which I sanded completely to a dull finish with quite a rough sanding to take the edge away. Then I lacquered it, then I took off that, smoothed off the lacquer, turned it cloudy again, and then brought it back up to a shine just using those papers. No wet and dry, nothing, just dry. So this is the neck having been broken. The reason why the headstock got broken is because the one thing I'm missing here in the Reloved workshop at the moment, and got to replace, or got to solve the problem, is a pillar drill. And if you're starting with a hole that's already there from these nasty little Chinese tuners, they have a very small hole in the headstock, and if you're going to fit decent tuners, you're going to have to drill out that hole. And drilling out a hole that's already in there, say it's a 10mm hole, and you're turning it into a 12mm hole, that is almost impossible to do safely and without breaking something if you do it with a hand drill. So you need a pillar drill to do that, or at least a pillar drill guide that you can strap or fix your hand drill into, and you need the drill spinning at quite a speed before you go anywhere near the wood, and this has to be clamped in a vise. Now you can tell by me telling that story, neither of those things were in place when I did it, and I actually invented something of a kind of homemade jig, which I then was able to screw into place, but even that wasn't good enough. So the force of the drill going into the wood split the headstock. So I learned my lesson, and next payday it's going to be pillar drill. Okay, so today we're going to take this neck and we're going to do a full fret level on it. And the frets are actually in pretty good condition all round. There's no real wear on them. If we're lucky, we may only have a couple of frets out of true, in which case we might do spot levelling, but we'll go through the whole rigmarole of taping it up and all that stuff, as we do on every guitar. And we're going to do a fret level and then a polish of these frets, and when we've done that we might add some oil to this fingerboard, because it is a bit dried out over the years. It's been standing in someone's attic or something. So alongside that we're going to do the same job, might as well do two at once, for this beauty. And this is my homemade travel guitar, which is nicely coming together now. You may have seen it in some other video, but I've managed to sort out some of the problems. Again, making this without a router, without a pillar drill, meant I had some problems with the positioning of the bridge, which I've managed to solve with a bit of brute force and some over drilling. And then the neck pocket and the pickup cavity, as well as the back cavity there, those have been done by hand, by chisel, the old-fashioned way. So it's obvious that having a router and a pillar drill save you time and give you more accuracy. But even with the slightly Stone Age techniques I've used, this is coming together really well, and it already plays nicely. But before I take it any further now, I'm going to do the same fret checking job on this. I'm going to, piece of information, I'm going to leave this oak raw and do a polish with those micro mesh cloths, really, just to bring up a kind of natural shine on it. And I don't really want to finish it with anything. I had bought some lacquer to do it, and I bought tinted lacquer, and actually it would just completely cover up the wood finish. So I may at best oil this a bit right at the end, if that's what you do with wood once you've finished it. But it's really nice. It's a real well balanced little guitar, and I can't wait to get the neck sorted out, get the strings on, and invent how the electrics are going to go. Right now I don't even have a clue how to fix the P90 pickup that I've got for this into this hole, so I'm going to have to do a bit of research on not only the fixing of the pickup but also the wiring. And these are pots I found kicking around here, and I don't even know if they're the right ones. So more fun to be had. But today it's just a neck job on both of these things. So without further ado, I'm going to whiz forward in time. Well, actually, I won't whiz forward in time, because I have to assume with these jobs that you're brand new to all of this stuff. So rule number one is never skimp the information, and if necessary redo everything. This little piece of wood here, by the way, its purpose is just as a cutting board for now. So to do this job, always mask off the fretboard, and I'll start it showing what I'm doing, and then I will mercifully fade the grey, and then I'll pick it back up when the thing is miraculously done. So the point about masking the fretboard is you're going to do some working on the frets, you're going to do some work with sandpaper or files, and what you want to do is make sure that the fretboard itself doesn't get damaged. So always start by masking the fretboard off. It's a bit of a laborious thing, which is why I'll cut the video in a minute. It's a bit laborious, but don't try and save on time. Now, I tend to get a load of tape out ready. Get splinters. Get tape out ready. And the thing to notice is as your frets get closer together, eventually this tape isn't going to fit. So to begin with, you can cut some fairly standard sized chunks. And I'll use the Encore neck for this, so I don't have to pick up a chunk of oak. And so all you have to do is get your masking tape, go right up to the edges of the fret, or the nut in this case, wrap it round and let it grab at the back. And each time you want it right up to the metal, but not over the top of it. If you get it over the metal, you'll be missing part of the metal, you'll make things difficult. So you can see that for these big wide frets down by the headstock, it takes 2 pieces of masking tape to do each one. But you can see that as we go further up, it's going to get down to 1, and then eventually it's going to be less than 1. So you have to be ready to cut little bits of tape in long ways, strips. Now don't be tempted. Whatever you do when you're doing this kind of setup work, do not be tempted to skimp on it, because you will really regret it. You will end up with marks on your fingerboard that you can't get off, and it will spoil what was otherwise a nice looking job. So as we go through this, I'll just talk to you a minute. Oh, the tape's still running. Tape, I said. How 1980s of me. As we go through, I'll just run you through the stages of the basic setup. So in this guitar, if you remember the last video, we took it in, we took it apart, we replaced the old pickups with a set from a Squire that we had already. So in that one move, we solved some problems with the old pickups, the Encore pickups being really rusty and nasty. So we solved that by getting rid of it, just changing the whole lot out. And we then wired, just checked that Squire scratch plate and made sure that it was wired correctly. I think it was. And then put that back in and tested it, and it seemed to be okay. And so the next job in setting up is to take care of leveling the frets. Now this is a job that to me is the foundation of everything we do here. And even if your guitar seems to be in really good nick, I will go through that process without a doubt, because if you don't get the fret leveling right, then the rest of the setup process is going to be in vain. What did that mean by that? Well, if, for example, if you come to the stage in the setup where you want to set the action of the guitar, then your action, height of the action, or how low you can get it, will be governed by the evenness of the frets. So if you don't take care of the frets, you will have limited yourself in how much adjustment you can make to the action, and the chances are you will not be able to get the action set to a level that you're comfortable, that you like playing at. So it seems a bit silly to take the guitar apart and try and do some work to it and then run out of options. So consider the fret checking and the fret leveling to be a necessary but fairly time consuming part of the setup, so that if you look on the video or look in an ad for when I'm selling one of these guitars and you see that the setup takes 3 hours, it will do, because this job alone will take about an hour, possibly a bit more depending on what you find. And it's really important to get it right. and to take the time, and it's one of those kinds of jobs, even like doing this, where you could get really bored of this and slack off and try and do it in a hurry. If you're going to do this yourself, you need to think every step of the way. If I short circuit this, if I try and skimp on this, I'm going to regret it, because it's going to jeopardise everything else I'm doing. So why waste my time and do all of this stuff if I'm just going to screw it up now because I want to rush time? So you've got to be really disciplined in this game, self-disciplined I'd say, and do not be tempted in any way to rush. So rule number one, the fret levelling is the foundation of your setup, and as I say, I won't do anything else without doing this. It may be hardly anything's required, but I haven't yet found a single one of my guitars that have done this or been through the setup process. I haven't found one yet that doesn't need it doing, so that's quite telling. So even if it's a little bit that requires alteration, then you've still got to go through the process. Now, as we get down to the narrowest part of the guitar, this gets fiddly because I'm having to divide each piece of tape now into 3 strips, because I'm going to need some really thin ones when I get down to that far end. Again, get prepared, sharp knife, plenty of masking tape, something on the radio, your favourite music on Spotify, whatever it takes. Just don't rush. And when we've done this, the purpose of the job of checking the frets is to have a look and see if any of these frets and any position on the fretboard is higher or lower than any of the others. And very often you will get that. They may not have been tapped in correctly when they were installed in the factory, or they may not have been pushed in hard enough, or they may have just eased their way back out over time. Who knows? What's important is that all the frets are level in relation to each other. If they're not level, what will happen is when you're fretting a note somewhere, if there's a fret up here that's higher than all the rest, you could fret a note here, and because this fret's sticking up, it will actually play that note there. And you can move your finger there and it's still playing that note there, move your finger to there, it's still playing that note there. That's because, in that example, this fret might be too high. And it could be too high by, I don't know, a sort of 20th of a millimetre. It's a tiny amount. The clearances, by the time you start fretting your strings up here, if you've got the action right, the clearances are really, really tiny. So a tiny fractional excess height in the fret will choke off or block off notes, and you won't be able to play notes. Or if you bend the string, you'll find that the note chokes on a high spot, and it'll go ding, and you won't be able to play it cleanly. So doing the fret check and the fret leveling allows you to ensure that you've got a great start point for your guitar. And once you've leveled the frets, once you've checked them and leveled them, then you will have the freedom to not only set your action, but you'll be able to set the intonation of the guitar accurately, knowing that you will be able to have a cleanly play notes anywhere on the fingerboard. And that is one of the main things that makes a budget guitar sound rubbish, is because, as I said before, almost every guitar I've seen has high spots, and they don't get taken away at the factory and they don't get taken away at the shop. So the only place they get taken away by is here. So that's what we're doing. Of course you can learn to do this yourself. Watch this video or watch any number of videos on YouTube that will tell you how to do it. What we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to check for high frets using a simple tool. We're going to mark the high frets that we find. Then, once we've done that, we're going to use a sanding or a filing technique to reduce the height of the fret. Now, we're not going to do it with some microscopic measuring device like this. We're going to do it by a very simple technique by eye, and I'll show you what it is in a minute. So it's not hugely scientific, but it's very accurate. And the watchword that you only will learn by experience, hopefully not find out the hard way. The watchword is take off less, not more. If you think about it, you are using a file or you're using some sandpaper. You're going to be taking away metal from the frets. You can't put it back on if you take too much away. So always err on the side of gentleness, and it will take it away and you will reduce the high spots, but do not go at it heavy-handedly. That's the main piece of advice. Okay, so we're getting close to having done the first of these necks, and I will switch the video off in a moment and we'll come back when both are strapped up and ready to go. Miraculously, it's done. We have both necks nicely masking taped up, and it's quite a bit later actually, it's all getting dark out there. But yeah, both necks prepared. Lots of little bits of masking tape, as you can see. Some blood from where I chopped my finger. And ready to go. So the first step in this is cover your finger with some masking tape so we can try and avoid getting too much blood everywhere. Probably survive, won't die from it, but right. So okay, first step. Here's a principle. Now I'm going to look for a piece of card or something. It's never the right thing, never where you want it. I'll do it on a piece of wood. Okay, so I can draw something. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to make sure, and we'll just do one at a time, so we'll start with the Encore. And the idea here is we're going to make sure, first and foremost, before we do anything with our frets, we've got to make sure the neck is level. So we sight ourselves down the neck and we have a look, and in this case the neck is pretty much level. And I checked that before in the last video, and I'm going to check down the neck on this one, and that is now also pretty much spot on. So just so happens we've got two level necks. If they aren't level, you need to make an adjustment with the Allen key in the truss rod, and most of them fairly uniform size Allen key, but you need to find out wherever it goes in. See, it's a bit like it might be slightly smaller on that one, but you adjust it. If you adjust it, you'll find plenty of instructions online, by the way, but if you adjust it downwards towards you, I think it will take the dip out of the neck, and if you adjust it the other way, it'll put more bow or more relief into the neck. But when you're doing the fret leveling, you need it to be level, even though when you put it back on, you're going to need to set it again so it isn't exactly level. But you must overcome the fear of touching the truss rod, because you have to use it in this setup. Okay, so having got that pretty much level, bear in mind that wherever you put the guitar neck down, the gravity is going to cause some curvature, right? There's no way around it other than doing everything in this operation that way. Some luthiers have a jig that holds it like this, and you do everything in the same plane as when you're playing it. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just be conscious of not putting too much force on it. And then the principle of this is to check for level frets, and there's a very simple way of doing this, and there's a high-tech way or a low-tech way, and oh blimey, got some holes in that. The high-tech way is the same as the low-tech way. The high-tech way involves a piece of metal that's specially bought for the job. It's called a fret rocker. And the low-tech way, I haven't got one here, but it's to use your credit card. So the principle of this is we're going to use the fret rocker. The fret rocker is designed with a very straight edge, and its purpose is to allow me to put the straight edge over my kittens, over 3 frets. I don't know, let's see if you can see it. So we start off by placing the long edge, in this case, over 3 frets. And the principle of this is if you can click, if you can rock it either side and makes a click, it means the fret in the middle is too high. Okay? Could be in for trouble with the kittens here. So imagine we'll do the extreme version. There's my high fret. You can see that the high fret gives me room and that you'll hear a click. So if we fire into this one and we start whichever end you want, but I'm going to start at this headstock end, and I'm just going across the width of the fret, and I'm just gently rocking, trying to rock backwards and forwards as I go. Listening, or feeling and listening for that little click that will tell me that the fret I'm checking is too high. In this case it isn't. Now, while you're doing this, have a permanent marker pen ready, because you're going to need to mark the frets when you find a high spot. So I didn't find any there, I'm going to move up a whole fret. You hear that? That's significant. That is a really high fret. So I'm going to mark the whole of that fret with my permanent marker. And not only am I going to mark the fret itself, but I'm going to draw a line on the masking tape either side. And the reason for that is that later on, when we start taking off the metal to lower the high spot, we'll also take off the black marker pen. And if we didn't make a mark on the masking tape as well, we wouldn't know where we had the problem. So this is like a double marker just to let us know. So that one's high. We move along to the next one, and again we've now around about the middle of this one. Again, it's very localized, so I can see it's from about here down to about here. Again, just this is the job now, just going along and marking whatever we find. Move up another one. Okay, now the reason your fret rocker you buy has different lengths on it is obviously the frets get closer together as you go up, and this long edge is great for doing them down here, but by the time I get up here I'm going to be in danger of covering 4 in one go instead of the 3 I need. So at this point I will change to the next shortest edge, so I'm just covering 3. And actually, although you can buy this one, your credit card sized thing pretty much allows you to get away with just 2. I think you can get away with, no, actually you need a credit card, you use the long edge, the short edge, and then cut down the shorter edge. So don't make it a current credit card. But that's the low-tech version, doesn't have to cost you anything. In fact, it could save you money if you're not very good at controlling your spending. So, okay, that's cool. Got one here again. Again, only on a certain spot. So marking where it starts and where it stops, and then filling that in. So I said earlier on that when you've got high frets on your guitar, and most of them have, or uneven frets, what it results in is, the reality is that most people then they're forced to set the string action, playing action, very high, because by setting the action high, it lifts the strings above the problem areas. So if you happen to buy a second-hand guitar and you notice that the action's really high, there are lots of reasons why that might be. If it's a Stratocaster type guitar, one of the classic ones is that the tremolo springs are too weak and the strings are pulling the tremolo up at the back. That results in a very high action. But another reason may well be that the previous owner has had to raise the strings to overcome the uneven fret problem. So he was getting buzzing or choked notes. And eventually you can cure that temporarily, if you like, by raising the action. And that's what very often a high action on a guitar will point to. So if you go out and you're checking out a guitar and it seems to have a really high action, be conscious that it may well be uneven frets. And so the beauty of doing this is it gives you back freedom to set an action the way you want it, not an action that's dictated by the problems, the underlying problems on your frets. So as you can see, we don't hurry this. This is when you start grinding away at your frets, you're going to be playing with the lifeblood of your guitar, and this is not a job. None of these are jobs to rush. You've got to be dedicated to doing this job properly. If you're not confident that you will stick it out and take it at the pace it needs to be done, then don't do it. But the good news is, if you are patient and you are thorough and you do the steps in the right order, then you won't make any you won't cause any disasters, and the likelihood is that you'll significantly improve your guitar's action and then therefore your enjoyment of playing it. And that's the bit that, in my experience, really excites people when they get their hands on a guitar that's been set up well, even if it's a budget guitar or a homemade guitar like this, is the immediate sense of it being better than anything they've played before. And often, if it's set up properly, better than a friend's £500 guitar or a guitar costing a lot more, because you've probably got the sense from what I've been saying all along that a good setup is pretty much the most important thing of all. It'll make all the difference. And also, a good setup means that a cheap guitar, budget guitar, can play fantastically well. And that's what hopefully the people who buy these Reloved guitars find out when they get them for the first time, and they find that they play very, very smoothly, and make if you're learning, it makes learning incredibly easy. You can fret chords down here, bar chords like famous F that beginners always struggle with. If your setup's done right, that becomes almost effortless. And I think it's not over exaggerating, I think, to say that can make the difference between somebody sticking with the guitar or giving it up. So I think it's really important, and it's a great pleasure to be able to do it. And for me, I'm one of those people that when you find something out that really makes so big a difference, can't hold me back. I want to share it with everybody, because there aren't many things in life that pay such a big dividend for so relatively little effort. And I really like the fact that cheap guitars that most people would turn their noses up can play better than expensive guitars out of the music shop, providing you give them the love and attention they deserve. And also, approach them with a bit of knowledge and a bit of patience and kind of logical, and be logical and have a sequence to it. So we're nearly finished marking up this one, and what we've found is, I'll show you in a minute, but there's quite a bit of high fret action on here. Now of course I can't really do the last fret because there's not another one on the other side. Same with the first fret, we don't have the option of doing those. Okay, so here's our take. 15 minutes or so into it, we've got this as a result. I'll hold it as still as I can so you can see. And that gives you a very clear indication of where the frets are high or low. And you might be able to spot some patterns in that. For example, and we see this all the time, sometimes when you get a bar of high fret, you'll spot immediately to the side what appears to be two points of high fret on the other one, and it happens there and there, and it happens there and there. It's interesting, and what it says is that one actually high, or is this one low? It's kind of a bit of a mind-boggling question. So here's the bit we get to now. So having marked up the high frets and properly marked the masking tape in the relevant places, I have to make a decision, and my decision is, do I do it the low-tech way or the high-tech way? Now the low-tech way involves the use of a piece of sandpaper and a block, could be a 9-volt battery or a little square block of, these are fret sanding rubbers, but that's the low-tech way. That 320 grit sandpaper and this block will take off metal, and it is perfectly adequate to cure all the problems on there. It just takes a little bit of time and takes being patient and not rushing. There's another way, which is to use a more custom-made tool, which obviously costs more. This is about £25 worth or something, but it has the advantage of being very flat, and it's built to do this job. And by virtue of its flatness, you can do pretty much the whole fretboard in one go. This approach with the sandpaper allows you to just concentrate only on these frets. This one, make sure of by virtue of the fact that it's big piece, it will take a bit off everything, but it will certainly take all the high spots off as well, and it will take a tiny bit off the other ones. So it's kind of this is a point you have to make a judgment call. And the way I would do it is if more than half of the frets on this neck have a black mark on them, I would be tempted to use this, get it done much quicker. Using this means that I then also have to afterwards reprofile every single fret, as opposed to if I just took care of these, I'd actually only have to reprofile the ones I've taken care of. But that would, if I did it fret by fret, that would give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, only 8. There'd only be 8 frets in the whole of this neck that I wouldn't have to deal with, and it would take me longer to do each one. So I'm going to go with the whole fret file approach, do it much quicker. It is a hell of a lot quicker, and it also gives me probably a better uniform finish. Now what it means is you just have to, this is the bit that's really scary, because you just have to kind of dive in. There's no way of practicing this other than getting a neck you don't care about. And what we're going to do is we're going to start, and we're going to try and keep an even pressure and do all of this neck. And we can't, obviously with the thickness of that, we're going to perhaps do it twice on that edge, twice in the middle, and twice on this edge. And I'll show you after the first run. So, and also what we want to do is we want to try and get an even pressure right from the beginning, so we don't miss the first frets. So here we go, I'm going to put it on here and off. Now you heard that, that's a nice scraping noise, and I don't know if you can see now straight away, you can see that it's ground off the top of these frets, and it's taken away the black marker. I wish you could see it, maybe you can catch a glimpse of it, but I can see where it's taken off the black marker pen, and I guess I'll do it again. This light in here is a certain colour at the moment, it's not giving me the clearest view, but it's working. I'm going to the middle. Sounds quite voracious, because it is. There's no mistaking it. This is taking off quite a bit of metal. But the beauty of it is that it's done it all in one pretty quick movement. So I'm looking at every fret that I had marked as high, and each fret that I've marked as high has been taken down, taken the high spots off. It's also taken off some of the areas around it, not just the bits I marked, but I know because of the nature of this tool that it's taken everything down to a uniform level. And there's just one edge I want to go over here. And that's it. Just catch the edge right at the end, which tend to miss. Now, having dived in and been courageous enough to do that, the next step is, before we do anything else, I'm going to recheck, because this should have solved the problem of the high frets. So I'm just going to pull the camera back up. My fantastic pieces of string, angle poise lamp as a camera tripod. So I should now go back to where I was, and lo and behold, I have no more rocking fret. Actually, there's a tiny bit there where I missed the edge of the fretboard, so and still a tiny bit. So go to every spot that you had identified as a high spot and just check it. And also check some spots that you didn't have marked up. Do a quick bit of random checking. Now that one's still high. I'm going to go over that one again. Still high. Now if you find that there are any tiny spots that are still out, then you can at this point take the sandpaper to them and do it that way, if you don't think it warrants going over it with the big fret file, if you're worried about taking more off any of the others. That's pretty much taken care of it. There are a couple of tiny spots that have some rocking remaining. I think if I find which one it was, that one there and that one there, and I'm just going to take the fret file to both of them. That's cool. Right, so brave, noble and fearless. Now taken a bit off pretty much every fret on the whole neck, but we have levelled it all out in doing so, and we've also now in a position to re-crown each of the frets. Now, to my little piece of drawing wood, I'm going to give you a little diagram. So let's have a think, how do we do this? Okay, I'm going to draw 2 frets. So here's the first one, and here's the second one. I'm going to deliberately draw it higher. Obviously not quite that way, but imagine that's one fret is higher. Actually, I've drawn them bigger, that's not the way I should do it. But one's obviously higher than the other. So what we do is when we use the fret file, we take off the top part of the fret, like that. And then what we're left with is, draw it this way, we're left with one fret, the original fret, that's the right height, and we're left with one that's now the right height but has a flat top on it, because we've made it the right height by taking off the curved bit at the top. Now what that means is we need to re-crown that fret, and the idea is, if I draw it as a dotted line, it's not very accurate, but hey, you can see what I'm trying to get across is we need to re-profile that fret so that it becomes as smooth as we can, pretty much like its original shape. And that actually means then taking off this excess material at the side and curving it round to leave us with a nice smooth fret, which is the same shape as the other one. And that's what we mean by crowning the fret or re-profiling it. And to do that, we're going to use a different tool. This one you can't get away without buying, but it's not expensive really. It's an £8 triangular file, and it has 3 sides, and one of the edges is smoothed off, ground smooth, and the purpose of that is so that you can, I'm going to move this one out of the way for a minute, somewhere where it isn't going to get broken, I hope. Yeah, so the purpose of the flat edge on this file is so that you can run it across the masking tape without doing any damage. If you used the sharp edge, you'd cut through pretty quickly to the wood. So before we do anything else, our job is to re-profile or crown these these frets back to the right shape. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cover all of them, everything, because we've covered, we've taken a bit off everything. So I'm going to go over this, and every fret is going to get a layer of permanent marker pen, cover them over completely. The reason we're doing this is marker pen gives you a good indicator. I'm going to work with this file to grind away or file away at the sides of these frets in a kind of curved way, so I can curve them over to meet the top. But what I don't want to do is take any more off the top. Why? Because if I did, then we're going to end up with more uneven frets. We've just done all of this hard work to get rid of those uneven frets. So the last thing we want to do at this stage is to get clumsy with this and end up grinding any more off the top of one of these frets, because we will literally undo all the good work. So the marker pen acts as a guide, and I'll show you in a minute how it works, but I'll tell you the reason it works is as you file along the edge on the sides of the fret, the file will take away the marker pen off the side of the fret, and your job will be to do the edges and work over towards the top and stop, and then go to the other side, do the edge and then work over towards the top and stop. And the aim is to leave a very, very thin line of black marker pen in a strip along the top of the fret. And if you do that, it means you've brought the sides up and curved them to meet the top, and not taken any more off the top, because you left a little thin pencil moustache of marker pen. That sounds really fiddly, but it is entirely possible to do. I learned it by just doing it, and I didn't mess up the first guitar I tried it on. So it's, you know, if you're very careful, you can do it. But if you're smart, unlike me, you'd get an old neck from a mate's guitar, or some old guitar that you've chucked away, or even a neck from an unplayable guitar in a charity shop or something like that, and practice on it, because you still got some frets there, and the job is still the same. It doesn't matter whether it came off a classical guitar that nobody would ever want to play, or a £2,000 Martin or something. Principle's the same. You're going to file the top of a fret, and then you're going to try and re-crown it so that it assumes the nice curved domed shape that it was in the beginning. And the marker pen principle works just as well on anything. So you can see we've now been 30 minutes into this job, and we're coming towards halfway through. Again, there's a really big payoff at the end of this when we finish reprofiling these frets, and we profile them all. So we've got a little thin line of black marker down the top. We know we've finished. We know we haven't reduced them in height in any way, and we're done, and we're ready to start sanding and polishing. And as we start sanding and polishing, it's very, very rewarding, because it means your nice new re-profiled leveled frets are being born, and at that point you tend to get an overwhelming urge to hurry up and put your strings on and get playing. And it's this sort of time, halfway through now, you've got to be really, really disciplined and patient, because it's worth doing, but it's worth doing properly. Okay, all my frets covered in marker pen. Why? Because I took a bit off all of them using this. If we only did a few spots, if we were lucky and we only found a few high spots, and we did them with the, if you like, the low-tech spot lowering technique, we then wouldn't have to do all of these. But we're going to have to do this because we had the split swings and roundabouts. Easier to level, more consistent leveling, takes longer to reprofile. Okay, so here's the hard work, and for this, if you're like me, slightly, what I am, long-sighted, getting old, need reading glasses, this is where you really should have a pair of glasses standing by. This is the bit that's hard to see, and you need to get up close and have a look. So I'm going to zoom you in so you can see what I'm doing. Again, we lose the light a bit as we come down here. My studio isn't perfectly set up. Okay, so here we go. Rounded edge, probably too close actually. Rounded edge, and we start with the file surface, one of the triangle sides, the opposite side to the rounded edge. We start with that upright, and we just go up to the edge of the fret, and just backwards and forwards until you can feel it starting to bite the fret. Okay, and again, we're going on the principle that it's gentle, slow, and you can always take a bit more off, but you can't put any more back on when it comes to metal. So you can see what I'm doing is I can feel it grinding against the metal, I can feel it taking some metal off, I can see the little tiny bits of swarf, and I'm starting to tilt the file over and start to take some of the metal nearer the top off, and as I do it, it's taking the marker pen with it. So again, I'm being careful not to slip over and drag it across the top, because that will then do what I'm trying to avoid, which is to avoid scraping any height off the top of the fret, because we've already levelled it. Now, I jump sides once I'm comfortable I've got that side going, and I start upright. I can see the shiny edge of the fret starting to get bitten, and then I tilt over my strokes, and I can see the light is reflecting off the fret where I've cut it with the file, and it's, as I tilt over, again I'm being very careful not to let it fall and skip over the top of the fret, because as I say, that will damage the top of the fret. And I'd probably get away with it. It wouldn't be disastrous if I did, but I want to avoid that. Now, you may not be able to see this, but in case you can, I'm looking at it, and the best way to do it is to eyeball it like that. When you've done it, eyeball it down the length of the fret, and I can see a nice little black stripe that I would say is probably just about 1mm, if not slightly less. And where I stand, that's a pretty good place to stop. Okay, and then we move on to the next one. Okay, so this process then will go on and on and on until you've done this. And like I said before, the only thing you've got to remember here is resist the urge to rush and cut it short, because if you try and cut any corners here, you will undo everything you've done. If you just plod carefully along, make sure you're not in a hurry to go anywhere. Put your favourite podcast on, or music, or TV show in the background, whatever it is you've got to do. Just don't plan on going anywhere until this is done, and don't rush. If you're not sure about how far over you've got, and you're feeling nervous and feeling like you're in danger of the file skipping across the top, then stop. Better to have a wider strip of marker pen, i.e. a little flat bit on top, than to mess it up and scrape the top off. What you'll find is the more you do this, the better you'll get. The thinner a strip you'll leave. That's the way you'll notice you're improving at this. You'll get to leave a thinner strip each time. But it's even if you didn't reprofile these frets, your intonation, the difference it would make to the intonation of the guitar, actually wouldn't be so bad that you wouldn't be able to play it. It would hardly be noticeable. We're doing this now to make this higher level of quality altogether than a cheap guitar has any right to be. So we're putting in, and you could be doing this too. It's not over complex, but in doing this, you're putting time and precision into a guitar that was never intended to have that, but is entirely capable of playing very well because of that time and precision that we're putting into it. And this is the bit that makes the difference. And my hope for you guys, if you're watching this, would be that at some point in the future, even if you don't follow these instructions, that perhaps either because you bought one of the Reloved guitars from me and you can feel the difference, or that you've just seen this and something about it gives you the confidence to have a go at doing this yourself. I would look forward to you having the experience of seeing how big a difference this is that you can make to a pretty much budget, basic, off-the-shelf guitar, which in some sense has no right to play as well as this, but will if you just follow these certain steps. And what's great about it is you'll learn that there is no magic to it. It's taking care of the basics of this, and when you do it, every guitar that you do this to will play pretty much as well. That is a great feeling. You can take, as I did when I started doing this, and I'm currently doing, take an Encore stratocaster, which years ago I wouldn't have turned my nose up at. I would have turned my nose up at, sorry. I wouldn't have given it time of day. I would have been very snobby about it. Because quite rightly, every Encore that you've probably ever picked up, either perhaps in your school music room or in a friend's sister's bedroom or something like that, every Encore you've probably ever played has probably been an absolutely lousy guitar to play. No, that one's almost gone too far. So there's a reason why they've got a bad reputation, because like any guitar coming out at a budget price, the Encores also came out not set up very well. Now, it's a shame in a way, because Encore, of all brands, the John Hornby Skews brand, has made a big effort over the years to produce what is in fact a fantastic foundation guitar, the Encore, this Encore guitar, which is the reason we're doing this, is in and of itself a really good platform for doing this work. So, and JHS, John Hornby Skews, have of all the manufacturers actually, I think have done an incredible amount of work to up the game and increase the quality of the starter guitars, and they've made a real difference to the market. And some of these Encore guitars are, in essence, really good, potentially really good guitars. But like all things, there's no point in it being potentially really good if it isn't set up right, because it'll just put that teenager off learning, make them want to give up, or make them fall into the trap of thinking that only expensive guitars can sound and play well. And once they're in that trap, then they're in that sort of endless cycle of changing guitars, looking for the perfect guitar or the one that plays really well, when in fact the truth is almost any of the guitars they've got could play well if they just were set up properly. And that's what Reloved Guitars is really all about. It's about making that point. Hang on, my kittens. So we're approaching the halfway mark. And like I say, time consuming, requires your patience and your certain degree of willpower. And again, that principle of not being in a hurry to take stuff off, because you can always take a bit more off, you can't put it back on once you've overdone it. So always stopping and looking before you've taken too much off. And if you're in doubt, stop and eyeball it in different light and see where you are. So I'm trying to buy the version of this guitar, the one step up from this. It's called an Encore Blaster, and it's renowned to be a really significant step up in quality compared to this one. And they're quite hard to come by. I've only seen a few in the last month or two I've been looking, and it's probably because people get hold of them probably almost by chance, buy them in a kit and realise they're pretty good pieces of kit and worth hanging on to. So still, I've been looking for one, and I came across, wait for it, a pink one today. For a reasonably low price, and typically, as all of them seem to be, it was up for collection only, which is a real pain in some ways. I mean, it makes it cheaper for the buyer and for the seller, but collection only really limits the amount of guitars that you can have access to, or if you're a seller, the amount of people that can buy. So I contacted the seller and asked if in the off chance that he didn't sell it through collection only, if he'd be interested in packaging it up and sending it, and he seems to be favourable. So we may have one of those. It's going to investigate the cost of sending it. Hello. That's yummy. Those of you who like Cardinal Burns will know yummy. Okay, so here we are, doing the hard work, going nowhere, taking our time, being patient. I've got another one to do after this. You think you're struggling to sit through this? I've got my homemade one to do straight after. But again, that one, as soon as I can get that one done, I'll be able to put its first set of strings on it and see how it plays as a non-electric. And then I'll be researching how to wire up a single P90, and double checking that I've even got the right electrics to go with it, because at the moment I'm just using cast-offs that I found. It shouldn't be too complicated. So one of the things that I was thinking is that it's so important to get a feel for a guitar that's been set up properly, that I'm contemplating having a stand or stall perhaps once a month at a local market down here, and having a few of these guitars nicely set up, available for people to put their hands on and feel how they play, and perhaps compare them to their memory of guitars they've played before. Because I think spreading the word, getting the message out there, isn't something you can really do in words. It's a feel thing. So I think it would be really smart to have a way of letting people feel the difference. And our local market is a pretty popular and busy little venue, so I'm kind of thinking about that quite seriously, maybe once a month, and actually seeing it much more as an opportunity to invite people to bring guitars for servicing and for proper setups, rather than trying to sell guitars in the market. I mean, we can take 4, 5 or 6 down there and show a variety that we've set up, but I think its value would be mostly getting a bit of a profile as somebody in the region who can set up guitars for musicians who currently don't do it at all. And you know, on one hand you'd think, well, surely anybody who's a musician would know how to do that, or at least be paying somebody to do it for them. And I'm not sure that's true, because my experience is I played for 30 odd years before I even dared have a go at doing this, or even knew what it meant actually. I certainly didn't know what the benefits of it were. I mean, I'd heard about it and I knew there was a bunch of people who charged £60 or something, whatever it was, for doing it, but I had no sense of what the benefits were. Certainly not enough of it to make me to go and do it or take it seriously. So having a stall in the market, careful, a stall in the market, and being able to hand out some leaflets, but also let people get their hands on and play around with a couple of these guitars, see the difference, and maybe also have an unset up one, but for comparison, the worst Encore that you could find, which is probably this one. That would be quite nice as a comparison. So maybe will be what I end up doing, because to be fair, from my perspective, people dropping their guitars off and letting me do this work and then coming and picking them up again in a week's time, it's a far better way of doing things. It's more profitable for a start, a lot easier, more manageable. But doing this with guitars is a way of practicing, learning the craft, and also a way of getting people out there to experience it and maybe spread the word. So we're nearly at the end of this one, and I'll stop the tape. I keep saying tape, I'm stuck in the 80s. Call me Uncle Rico. We'll stop the recording in a minute when we've done this, and what I'll do is I'll restart and we'll go on to the next bit, which will be the sanding and polishing, which is the immensely satisfying part part of it. This is the payoff for having sat it out with me for the last half an hour or so. I'm going to get backache from doing this too. This is the downside of making your own workbench furniture. It's probably just low enough to give me permanent surgical problems. There. Now the one on the end technically shouldn't need any doing because I didn't actually. Oh, did I take? Yes, actually I did take them off. Although I didn't check it for fret. I couldn't check it for fret height. I did actually take some material off with the file. So it will get done. So, you've seen this in real time. You know the degree of concentration it takes. If you're somebody who isn't able to sustain concentration for that length of time, then you may want to rethink doing this because it could cost you in the end. Backache. Okay. So, here we have it. Again, you won't see it in this light, but that is a little thin strip across the top of all of these frets, meaning the job is done. Now, this is the fun bit. I'm going to stop and start. Okay, right, here goes the fun bit. So, we have some, what do we have? We have some two sets of paper. We're going to do two things. We're going to do sandpaper and we're going to do Dremel polishing. We might not even do Dremel polishing. We might just go away with sandpaper. The reason why is we've got these wonderful micro mesh things, and we go from, this set goes from 1500 grit to 12,000, and here we go from 6 to 8 to 1200. So I'm going to I'll start with these and then I'm going to move on to these. And to begin with, so I know where I'm going. 6, 8, 1000, 1200. So, with the 6, remember, the lower the number, the higher the scratchiness. So at this one, we don't want to be rubbing away like crazy because this is only twice or half the abrasiveness as the one we could have used, the 320, to actually level the frets. So we want to be very gentle with this. The purpose of this one is to take off the main scratches if we can. Okay, so I'm doing it manually and I'm letting my finger bounce up and down over the top of the frets, and we are just going back and forth over the tops of the frets. And with a bit of luck, this will be smoothing off any flat top to the fret, but also hopefully taking away any of the deepest gouges or beginning to rub away some of the biggest scratches that are remaining. Okay, so again, and using the finger as opposed to the block, lets the sandpaper sort of roll over the fret. We could do it as well by using a piece of foam, an angled piece of foam, just kind of do the same sort of thing. Bounce over a bit noisier, but it bounces over the top. If I can hold on to it. I can still see some tiny little pits of marker pen, which tells me that there's still some scratches in there. But on the very top, we'd expect that on the very top part of the fret. We don't want to scrape that to get rid of them. We want to take them out very gently by repetition rather than by force. Okay. Okay, so keep them on the loose again. So again, just going over it a few more times. Again, as I say, I can see where the where a bit of marker pen is still residing on the very top of the fret, which is okay. It means that's a flat part right on the top of the fret. We expect that because we left it untouched, and that very top millimetre will be flat. And we're just rounding that last bit off without taking too much. We're bound to take a tiny bit off, but we're doing it without taking too much off. I'm sticking with this a little bit longer than normal because the point about this is the minute you move away from 600, everything then gets softer or less abrasive. And if you haven't made any headway on these scratches at this stage, then you probably end up leaving them in if you just move up the numbers of grit. So this probably requires the most time on this paper, this 600 grit. But again, being really careful that everything gets an even amount and your finger rolls over the top of the fret. What we don't want to be doing is stopping on any one fret and scratching away for any length of time, because that will then just recreate another flat spot and we'll be back where we started. So as long as we're sort of evenly matched. Now I can just, at the moment, I can just see one or two frets with a bit of black marker still lodged on the top. But I'm going to move to 800 and let's go again. So again, sort of tiresome and repetitive task, and if you get really bored, get the pointed foam block, and a bit noisier, but a bit less tiring than holding it. Keep an eye on the masking tape on the fretboard. At this stage, if you see it peel back and expose any fretboard, stop and remask it. Don't run the risk of continuing, because by the time you get to the stage where we're going to maybe do a polishing wheel on the Dremel, then you will really mess up the wood on the fretboard if you haven't masked it off again. Now, at this stage, I'm coming up to the 1000 paper, and I'm going to, at this stage, I'm going to go backwards and forwards, because now we're getting to the level where we're now starting to begin the polishing process, so that the scratch marks now are getting gradually worn away. But I'm also, on this grade of paper, I'm also going to do backwards and forwards to just try and get rid of the last little bits caught in the top of the frets. But actually I can pretty much see that they're almost going as it is from doing this. Now previously when I used to do this, I would have stopped at about 2000 grit. Now I got to 12,000. It's worth taking the time. So now I'm going to do a bit of backwards and forwardsing. Again, not too long, just enough to smooth out any final scratches on the tops. I don't want to flatten them off too much. Yeah, so I've gone up quite a big step in terms of the grit, and having such a fine set actually really pays off in terms of the the level of polish you get to. Sorry, my windows are rattling. Yeah, it really pays off in the level of polish you can get to without having to use any polishing compounds. Okay, so we go from 1,000 to the cloth, which is 1,500, and this way I will use the block. It makes it easier to hold. So, quite a lot. You can see it's putting a big stripe on there. This, again, as I said, this is a process of a lot of hard work. But when you think about it, your guitar, you might then play it every day for the next year. And what you're doing is you're doing an hour's work now to give you that whole year of satisfaction. And I guess the thing that keeps me motivated to do this, which may seem a bit strange to you if you haven't done it, is I know what it's like afterwards. So that's, once you've done it, you will always be able to do it again, because you'll know what's coming in a minute. And that's a really good bit. So I'm just piling away through on these papers, on these cloths, getting higher and higher grit. Over the pressure now. I'm going right to the end so that we don't ignore those high frets. And then the plan will be to probably get right down to the 12,000 grit, and then I might get a soft wheel out on the Dremel and put a bit of polishing compound on and just go over each fret once with one of the polishing compounds and stop at that point. Beautiful sunset going down out there. Just to show you, it's not all about doing guitar things. So turn your little heads around. Oh shit, that's me busting my guitar stand. Pretty, isn't it? Now what am I going to do? Oh yeah. Fix. Christ, that doesn't sound very good. Strapped the angle poise lamp back in order. Okay, we're now heading for 4,000, and in my experience now, 4,000 tends to be the point at which things start to go shiny. 6,000. I've only got another one to do. And 8,000, and then the final one after that will be 12. Is practically feels like a piece of leather until it's abrasive at all. Right, what have we got? Nice, 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 nice. Have a look through here. I guess if we had a microscope we'd be able to tell straight away. It's looking quite nice. Okay, let's find a cleaning wheel in the Dremel department. Got a few, they're kind of worn out, but I've never read the Dremel book, I'm ashamed to say. I don't ever quite know if I'm using them in the right way, which is probably no surprise that they wear out as quick as they do. I'm just going to reverse this one, give it a bit more life on the other side. And we'll have a bit of polishing compound out of one of our jars. So again, critical that the masking tape is on and still covering all the wood. You don't want to do any damage. And we'll go for the sticky white stuff, compound 3. And I'm just going to put this on by hand. This is going to fling it off anyway, this wheel. That's my experience of doing it. It gets a bit messy and chucks it everywhere. So it kind of almost doesn't matter where you put it to begin with. It'll just go all over your desk and all over you. So you'll be ready for that. Right, bit of noise, and here we go. Splatter. Right, goo everywhere. So, here's the fun part. And this part, funnily enough, is going to require patience, probably even more than any of the other bits. This is the bit where, in your haste, you might pull out the cutting blade and think you're going to pull it off or cut it without. Don't. Fingernails only, and take the time to unhook it. At this point your neck will have got grubby. That's fine, you can polish that up later. But this is the payoff. So we're about an hour or so into it. So 1 of our 3 hours of setup time. At least 1 hour's gone doing this. No quick way around this. But this is how you add value to a guitar. And as I keep saying, you'd be amazed once you learn how to do this. You'd be amazed how many basic guitars are nonetheless of a quality that if you put the time into them, they have essentially all it takes to be turned into perfectly playable. In fact, guitars that are great to play, which is what we're doing here. And the sort of story that we like to believe that only a £1,000 Gibson somehow has this quality, it's not true. In fact, most of the time, a £1,000 Gibson, like many other guitar, often isn't set up properly either. And people will say, well, you can't set up a guitar in a sort of general way because everyone has their own particular preference, and that's true. But actually, I haven't ever come across anyone so far who doesn't like a reasonably low action. Not many people, in my experience, I've never met one, actually asks for a higher action, a more difficult action to play. Most people like an action that's a mixture of being resonating cleanly and being comfortable to play, and that's what we're doing here. So I don't think it is the case that only an individual can set up a guitar to suit them. I think you can set up a guitar very well and it will suit most people. So here I am pulling all this goo off. Again, taking care of this last bit not to get too much of it if possible on the neck. There's no point having cleaned it once and no point making the neck dirty again in that little spider's web of goo. And I'm going to take some alcohol, rubbing alcohol, to this neck. It won't do the wood any harm, but what it will do is help me get off any of the goo and any of the marker pen that got down the sides of the frets as we were doing this process. So I'm just going to whiz up and down with that. I don't want to get too much into the grooves. Like that. I'll do once on the back too because we've got gooey. But there we are with our freshly done, again hard to see in this light, our freshly levelled, beautifully shiny neck to rival any expensive brand name guitar. In fact, not only to rival it, to probably trump many top name guitars. So nice and shiny, good and clean. Right, so we will be ready to replace this onto its interestingly lacquered body, and I'll stop and start for that bit.